Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on Friday afternoon. Today is August 23rd and we have a Thursday night football game to react to. Not quite yet regular season, but still a very interesting game between the Colts and the Bengals, where the Bengals didn't start anybody really, but we did get to see Anthony Richardson playing, and considering he has very high expectations for some this upcoming season, I want to break down his performance and what I expect out of him this upcoming season. We are then going to be diving into some of the buzz surrounding Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, who is potentially going to be entering his final NFL season, will be a Hall of Famer, first ballot without a question, but will he be able to lead the Jets to a winning season and putting together a year that Jets fans have been desperately hoping for the past decade plus? We will then be finishing off our NFC South previews by looking today at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the 2023 division winner, talking about whether they can repeat success this year, and we will then from there talk about all of the 2023 division winners. Every year we have shakeups of teams falling in and out of the playoffs. This year, or in today's show, we're going to be talking about which teams this year could go from a division winner to out of the playoffs. And then finally, to wrap up the show, going to be diving into my predictions for the 12 playoff teams in college football. So a whole lot to dive into, but before we're going to start off the show by diving into last night's preseason game between the Colts and the Bengals. Ultimately, finally getting past the preseason games where it feels like there is a lot to take out of it, 100%, and I've been enjoying that football is back, but ultimately we all know we're not here to watch preseason. It's about regular season games, and that starts up in a couple weeks, so very exciting there. But last night we did get a pretty extensive look at Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson, who obviously has been, I wouldn't say struggling to stay on the field, but last year wiped out with a season-ending shoulder injury that was coming off of as well, where he had a concussion a few weeks prior. So Anthony Richardson went through the ringer a little bit from a physical standpoint last season in his rookie campaign, but a lot of people are anticipating him to bounce back really strong and emerge as one of the top young quarterbacks in the league. And I am definitely hoping that that is the case, because Anthony Richardson, with his frame and his specific skill set, I think he can be must-watch TV in terms of being a bruiser, having that athletic ability like a Lamar Jackson, but also having that extra bit of size and toughness to him, sort of like a Josh Allen, that I think could make him absolutely one of the most fun quarterbacks in the league. But as we saw last night, there were some ups and downs with him. And I think that that's something that's important to consider when, especially, he's been just getting so much love. Now, some of it fantasy football-wise, but just been getting a lot of love throughout the offseason. Jeremy Lapidus, one of our hosts here at the GSMC Sports Network, he had a hot take earlier that Anthony Richardson could be in MVP conversations. And while that's definitely possible and it's something I'm rooting for, I do want to pump the brakes a little bit. What we saw from Richardson last night is that he is capable of putting together methodical drives. The opening drive for the Colts, that was all scripted out, important to consider there. Obviously, NFL, all football teams really typically tend to script out the first drive or two, and Anthony Richardson was phenomenal on the first scripted drive, where I believe it was 7 of 8 that he completed his first 6 passes, helped lead the Colts down the field 80 yards for a touchdown, where he was able to link up with Adonai Mitchell. Also a really great sign for the Colts there, that their young quarterback and their rookie receiver, who sort of just fell into their lap during the draft because of potential character concerns, is what Adonai Mitchell was being dinged for. But Mitchell is a baller, and he showed off a little bit of that last night. Only those couple catches on the first couple on that first drive, 2 catches, 18 yards and a touchdown, but encouraging to see there. And again, Anthony Richardson, it's not like he was making any of these incredible throws, but it was reading what was in front of him, especially the RPO that they ended up running. He was able to hit, might have been Alec Pierce over the middle for a pretty nice pickup then. I think that a lot of credit goes to some of the other players as well for the Colts stepping up. I think it was on 3rd down, again, might have been Alec Pierce, where Anthony Richardson actually threw it back to the line of scrimmage, but Pierce had room, so he was able to climb up and get the first down yardage there. And it was encouraging for sure. Keep the simple things simple. But from there, once the Colts started to go off script a little bit more, things fell apart for Anthony Richardson. The offense entirely stalled out, 3 punts, and Richardson even threw a pick 6 in there as well, where it just seemed like him and his tight end weren't on the same page. He was expecting the tight end to maybe sit down where he was or break to the inside, but he ends up going outside. Richardson puts it in the wrong spot. It was more of a miscommunication, I think, than anything else, which honestly might not even be the worst thing in the world, where I thought that his accuracy, his precision, his touch was a little bit off from post that first drive. And that's just the thing with Anthony Richardson, is he has all of the tools and he's very capable of becoming a full-time franchise quarterback. But I feel like people are sort of rushing to give him, I wouldn't say praise is the right word because he deserves praise, but I think people are trying to put him in conversations that I just don't know if he's ready yet. The Thursday Night Football crew, they put up a graphic during it was one of the second or third drives, and it was that Anthony Richardson has played in just 22 total starts since 2019, in the past 5 years. And this is somebody who went top 5 in the NFL. I think he was 4th in the 2023 class, and he started just 6 high school games, 12 college games, and 4 NFL starts. So that is, well, you can also probably include, I guess, 23 if you're counting week 1 of the preseason, but ultimately, obviously, we know those don't really matter. The point being, though, Anthony Richardson is still very inexperienced, and he's young, and I think that there is time for him to iron out some of the precision issues with him, but I'm just not going to, get ahead of myself when it comes to the evaluation of Anthony Richardson and what he is in the now and what he could lead the Colts to in 2024. I feel like we should just be taking a deep breath and just trying to see, before we put him in any sort of crazy conversations, let's just see the kid start a full season and sort of watch what it looks like and figure things out from there. Because I get it, he is everything that you could possibly ask for if you're an NFL fan in terms of an entertainment standpoint, what he could bring to the game if he is able to hit his ceiling. But again, we have not seen extensive experience from Anthony Richardson, and with that, you're going to have a lot of errors along the way. Sure, the interception that he ended up throwing was miscommunication. I feel like those are the plays that are very easily fixable once he gets those more reps. So I'm looking forward to that. But again, just the touch and precision is sort of where I have at least slight doubts. I don't think he's looked all that sharp passing out of the pocket through his first couple preseason appearances, whether it's throwing high, not being able to hit guys perfectly in stride. You can see there are steps that need to be made in the passing game before Anthony Richardson becomes everything that he is being slated out to be. And I'm not trying to be overly negative on him. We're talking about 2 preseason games, so obviously very, very small sample size, pretty unimportant sample size. But I think that sort of ties into the sample size of Anthony Richardson actually playing football at a high level is also very, very small. And people are starting to throw him into these conversations that I just don't know if I'm ready to get there yet. Richardson was a late bloomer in terms of the pre-draft process ahead of 2023. He sort of won the offseason that year. We get those types of quarterbacks every single year. I think that J.J. McCarthy was a little bit of an example of that in this past year's draft. And Anthony Richardson, again, very capable. I'm definitely in on him for the long run, but I have to see more before I'm willing to plant my flag in him. And obviously, I think that some of this stems for me coming from fantasy football projections, where a lot of people have Anthony Richardson as a fantasy football quarterback, number 1 in the NFL, maybe top 3, top 5, depending on where you're looking. Fantasy football isn't reality, which is important to consider. So maybe I'm unfairly dinging Richardson because I've just seen so much love for him in fantasy football, which is fair because we know that he can run. And the Colts are going to have an excellent rush offense, I feel like, this upcoming season with him and Jonathan Taylor together with that offensive line in front of them. And the Colts should have a good offense in general as well. I mean, they have good skill position players. They bring back Michael Pittman. They have Josh Downs. They draft Adonai Mitchell. They're deep in the tight end room. There are more than enough options to help Anthony Richardson succeed. But I think we're going to see a lot of rough moments from him, honestly, this upcoming season, which doesn't have to be an indictment on who he will forever be in the NFL. But I do feel like it's just something that I think I'm just walking a lot more cautiously with Anthony Richardson conversations than a lot of other people seem to be. But let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on Anthony Richardson and what expectations should be asked of him in 2024. Because I think the bar should be much lower. Let's just see the kid play, and then we can start to have some conversations. But I think he's, to some degree, being set up for failure a little bit by the way he's being talked about. But again, maybe I'm just being too picky. You let me know in the comments section. But finally, excited to get past these preseason games. We'll definitely be talking about them early next week because it's football. We love football. But, NFL right around the corner, the regular season is. So definitely looking forward to that. And speaking of which, it is an especially important upcoming season for Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, who are basically playing for their careers at this point. Aaron Rodgers is. Robert Saleh is coaching for his career at this point. Joe Douglas in the front office. All of these guys have tremendous amounts of pressure on them in this upcoming season. And if things don't pan out for them, they might all be out of their current roles headed into 2025. So I want to talk about the Jets, my expectations for Aaron Rodgers coming off of this Achilles injury at his age 41 season. What does he need to do to be able to deliver a successful season for the Jets? We will be discussing that and more when we come back on the other side of the break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
In the world blind, please Lord give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please Lord give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into what the expectations are for Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Earlier this week at training camp, there was a clip that was going viral a little bit that got Jets fans very excited. It was Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson linking up on a 55-yard dime from Aaron Rodgers down the left sideline to hit Wilson in stride, and you can see all of the attendees of Jets training camp were going crazy because those were the expectations headed into last season before, of course, 4 snaps into the season, everything changed, and Aaron Rodgers went down with that torn Achilles injury, and now a lot of people are more skeptical on what the Jets are going to be. And that's because, obviously, the history of quarterbacks age 40 or older already is not good. We see quarterbacks, we've been through the list multiple times here on this show of some guys not even make it to 40 years old, Drew Brees and Peyton Manning being some of those that the history would show that time eventually catches up with you. And to some degree, I think that's kind of what happened last year. Obviously, it's a freak injury for what happened to Aaron Rodgers, but at 40 years old, your body just can't take the same explosive movements that they once could. So that's definitely a concern with Aaron Rodgers, especially added to the fact that Rodgers had probably the worst season, and obviously a very high bar is the reality with Rodgers, but ultimately probably his worst season of his career that he's been fully healthy when we last fully saw him in 2022. Now, there was other stuff going on there. He was very frustrated with the front office, and the roster wasn't quite the same construction-wise, but they ended up missing the playoffs, going 8-9. Very uncharacteristic turnovers from Aaron Rodgers, 12 of them. That's the second most of his career. Last time he threw 12 or more interceptions was back in 2008. So, again, not a very positive sign in terms of what will Rodgers be able to do coming into his age 40 season, let alone missing his entire age 40 season with a torn Achilles and trying to come back for your age 41 season. So I think there's a lot of red flags that are baked into this. Ultimately, when you're talking about the Jets, though, you go from Aaron Rodgers and these, very high bar for his level of success. His level of success, to put it nicely, is much more advanced than the expectations and level of success with the New York Jets based off of how they have performed over the past couple decades. And I think at this point, Jets fans would probably, let me know in the comments section if you feel differently, Jets fans would probably be okay with just making the playoffs, being competitive in a playoff game, and sort of seeing where things lie from there, which is very much on the table. A lot of people have the Jets winning the AFC East. I have a little bit more hesitations with that personally, because I don't think that the Bills are going to fall off quite as much as other people do. You still have the Dolphins. It's a tough division, but that being said, the Jets have been able to, these past 2 years with Zach Wilson and others in the starting quarterback position, they've been able to at least stay alive in the playoff hunt late into each of the past 2 seasons. So ideally, you just need somebody in Aaron Rodgers and anybody really, even Tyrod Taylor is the backup quarterback, just guys that aren't going to give the football game away. And that's sort of what they've had these past couple years, that if they can be a league average offense, then they should be in a very good position. Robert Saleh, do I know that he's a great head coach? Definitely not. But he has coached the defense to be one of the top units in each of the past few seasons. That's obviously his background coming from being a defensive coordinator with San Francisco. So I think he knows what he's doing on the defensive front. Now, we've heard a lot of the noise that has come out, especially I think it was the Athletic that wrote an article talking about the Jets' dysfunction coming out of 2023 and definitely did not put Robert Saleh in a great light. But again, tensions were very high in that season. Everything was going awry based off of where they thought they were going to initially be headed into the regular season, expecting Aaron Rodgers to be available for them and having that yanked away from them 4 plays into the season. So definitely not an easy situation to manage, but we'll see whether or not he is able to, hold on to his job. At this point, he's coaching for his job at this point. If the Jets have a bad season, then he knows he's probably out. Aaron Rodgers had a pretty interesting quote. It was back in May about this type of situation where he was talking about what happens if he isn't able to sort of recapture his greatness and the Jets end up having a poor season. He said, quote, "I think if I don't do what I know I'm capable of doing, we're all probably going to be out of here." And that's in reference to himself, probably head coach Robert Saleh, general manager Joe Douglas, and more as well. So it's going to have to be, and it might already be, a little bit of cleaning house for the Jets, even if they do have success. This feels like it is probably Rodgers' last season, which if he ends up turning out a good year, he definitely is going to want to come back. I think he is fueled a little bit, at least a little bit, by Tom Brady playing to 45 years old or whatever it was, that he's going to want to, and especially with the personality that he is, he wants to break the stereotype and sort of be an outlier in terms of the what history would say happens to quarterbacks aging, that he wants to be sort of above the rest. This is a guy who was talking about how he was going to return from his torn Achilles injury in the same season, which was always, frankly, ridiculous. But, irrational confidence. It's something you do sort of want out of your quarterback. And Rodgers is going to do absolutely everything he can to, except for pass on a trip to Egypt. But, he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that he and the Jets are in the best possible situation, the right, headspace to be able to go and prove the doubters wrong. And I think they actually have a pretty solid offense. Now, in terms of receivers specifically, you don't see a lot of depth there, which I do think is a concern. It was a concern for them last year that was sort of swept under the rug. Now, they at least were able to sign Mike Williams to a 1-year deal, so if you get him fully healthy, that's definitely a huge plus for the Jets. But again, I have some concerns at wide receiver, but the offensive line is definitely improved over the past year. They bring in John Simpson and Morgan Moses from Baltimore. They signed Tyron Smith to a one-year deal. They draft Olu Fashanu in the first round to try and add some depth at the offensive line as well. Elijah Vera Tucker is a good player. I think that the Jets will be able to protect Aaron Rodgers for the most part. I think that's another thing when you look back to his 2022 season. It seemed like Rodgers was throwing it away a lot quicker than he usually does because he was trying to avoid taking hits. That's obviously a very important thing for him. We saw that with Tom Brady as he was sort of closing out his final years. So I think their offensive line is at least league average at this point. Now, we'll see if that does hold up, but I think their running game can also be really good, and that's obviously also very dependent on their offensive line. But Breece Hall, one of the best running backs in the NFL, who obviously is dual threat in the pass and the run game, but crazy acceleration and explosiveness from him. And then they end up drafting Braylon Allen in what was the 4th round, running back out of Wisconsin. And Braylon Allen is a specimen. 6'1", 235 pounds, very big for a running back. And he is just so fun to watch go. And I think that he can add a very real new element to this Jets team if they're going to, at some point, have to be ground and pound and short yardage. I think Braylon Allen is going to definitely carve out a role for himself with the Jets this year. And like I mentioned, so that's the offense that's obviously the most relevant to Aaron Rodgers, but the identity of this Jets team the past couple years has been defense, and they should still be able to produce at a very high level. Very talented, specifically secondary between Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Michael Carter as well is a little bit underrated. That's an incredible cornerback group. Their front seven is pretty strong as well. So, I think that they have a great opportunity to, but truthfully, I do have some real hesitations putting stock into Aaron Rodgers in his age 41 season. I understand this is a Jets team that should be competitive every single game because of their defense, but I'm definitely not sold on the idea that clip that I mentioned earlier, that is going to be the regular for him, that he looks like the old Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he does have his moments, but I think that it is going to be, a season of ups and downs. And again, the patience level of Rodgers is going to be massively important, because if he doesn't trust his linemen, if he doesn't trust his receivers, I feel like he is the type of person that would sort of disengage mentally, and things could fall by the wayside from there. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But we're now going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to wrap up our season previews for each NFC South team. And today we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, your 2023 NFC South champions. So we are going to dive into the Baker Mayfield contract, the moves they made over the course of the offseason, and looking at their schedule to determine whether or not the Buccaneers can repeat as NFC South champs. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, little technical difficulty there, but we are now diving into the upcoming season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who won the NFC South in 2023 and are hoping to have similar success this year. And they feel confident, at least internally, in being able to do so because they brought back their quarterback, Baker Mayfield, on a new 3-year, $100 million contract, which was a lot of money. But at the same time, Baker Mayfield definitely earned it based off of his performance last year, putting together a career season and sort of flawlessly, sliding into this role in Tampa Bay, where post Tom Brady, they had a lot of question marks at the position. And Baker Mayfield, is he elite? No, but he is more than capable of getting the job done. And not only did he lead them to a division title last year, they even won a playoff game. And I think that Baker Mayfield deserves a ton of credit for the level of adversity that he's been through these past few seasons after playing through an injury in his final season in Cleveland and them end up discarding him for Deshaun Watson of all people. And then bouncing around for a couple years, ending up in Tampa Bay and throwing for a career-high 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. I was very impressed by what Baker Mayfield was able to produce last season, and I think he can give you similar production this upcoming year. Now, it is important to note, possibly, that there is an out in his contract after this upcoming season. So if we see Baker is a flash in the pan, the Buccaneers could potentially move off of him, but I don't think that this is how it's going to play out. I think that Baker is more than capable of continuing to at least play out the next 3 years with Tampa Bay. But overall here, when you look at this offense, ended up being fine numbers last year. Passing game 17th, so when you talk about Baker Mayfield, definitely does deserve credit. Again, though, it's not like it was this unbelievable offensive juggernaut led by Baker Mayfield. The biggest concern with their offense is the lack of a real run game. And I think that's going to be the case once again this upcoming year, where Rachaad White is a nice receiving back, but I don't know how many people are putting stock into him in terms of being a true every down running back and can get it done in the trenches. Rachaad White's a fine player, don't get me wrong, but we see 32nd in rush yards per game last year. That is dead last, and you're running into it with a very similar running back room that isn't all that talented. Outside of Rachaad White, I'm not too familiar with the names of Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. They do have Chase Edmonds, who's currently dealing with an injury. Maybe he provides a spark for them when he ends up getting fully healthy. But again, still not a very good rush attack. Offensive line is fine. Going to be really interesting to see Graham Barton, their first-round draft selection. He is going to be playing immediately for them and manning the middle at center. So he's going to have a lot of expectations in this upcoming year. If I'm not mistaken, they did just re-up Tristan Wirfs on a new contract. Let me know in the comment section whether or not I'm wrong on that one. But I'm pretty sure I saw that they re-upped Tristan Wirfs, who is one of the best young left tackles in the game. So they have their blindside guy. They could have their man in the middle if Barton ends up panning out for them. But it's still, kind of a lot to ask of some young players. Specifically, Barton is the one I'm looking at. but I think that they could definitely be capable of it. This is a Buccaneers team that's probably league average in terms of offensive line, so we'll ultimately see how that pans out for them. They were really bad in the run game last year. They were last in ESPN's run block win rate, so that's where you need to see the Buccaneers improve this upcoming season if their offense is going to take the next step. But, you know, we'll see whether or not that does end up panning out. But defensively, again, kind of a mediocre group. This is a team that, again, you're talking about the NFC South, which was wide open last year. I think it's very open once again this upcoming season. But defense was fine. I do think that they have a lot of intriguing pieces, especially on the younger end in that front seven. We already know about Vita Vea, of course, but Kalijah Cansey, their 2023 first-round pick, Yaya Diaby emerged for them, and I think he is due for a spectacular breakout season this upcoming year. So I can get behind their front seven. They do lose Devin White, but at that point, I don't think that that's a massive loss for them. Levante David still holding it down for them, getting up there an edge though, so we'll have to see about that. They were very good against the run last year, and I think that that's on the table once again. Now, they bring back Antoine Winfield on a new deal in the secondary. Ultimately, it's a fine secondary, but I definitely don't have all that much confidence in them being all that much better than what they were last year, which was 29th in the league in passing defense. Now, getting some more pressure up front with the emergence of Diaby and Cansey could definitely help put pressure on opposing quarterbacks and add to, you know, give your secondary some help in terms of you don't have to hang in there quite as long. But I don't really see all that much upside with this secondary, at least for 2023. Again, you at least have a guy back there and a very real guy and one of the best safeties in the league in Antoine Winfield. Outside of that, though, pretty underwhelming group, which means I think that they are going to be susceptible against the pass once again. Looking at their season, I think that ultimately, you know, it's middle of the pack in terms of strength of schedule. I think the first part of their schedule could be very tough for them. In Detroit, week 2, facing Philadelphia at home week 4, road games against Atlanta and New Orleans, home against the Ravens, and, you know, week 9 as well, going to Kansas City and then following that up with a game at home against San Francisco. The first half of this schedule, I think, is very difficult for the Buccaneers, and I could see them struggling out of the gates. But where this season is going to be won or lost for them is during this final stretch of the year where there are so many winnable games there, where you're playing the Giants, you play the Panthers, the Raiders, the Chargers. You play the Panthers twice, actually, post the Week 11 bye week. So those are games the Buccaneers are going to need to clean up on if they want a chance to win this division. Their over-under line is set at 8.5 games, and I have them going slightly over at 9-8, would actually match their record from last year. And that would map out the way that I view the NFC South this year, that they would be right below the Atlanta Falcons for the 2024 NFC South title. I think that ultimately it's not a great division, but the Falcons, the Buccaneers, and the Saints are all teams that can go out and punch you in the mouth any given week, and I don't think that any of them are rollover outings. Last year we saw the Buccaneers win this division with 9 wins, but the Falcons were at 7. The Saints also, I believe, had 9. So, you know, it was congested up at the top of this division. Sorry, Carolina. I just don't think that this is the year that they're able to sort of reassert themselves into contention. But I think that I do have the Falcons end up winning this division, and that could leave the Buccaneers out of the playoffs altogether based off of how the NFC ends up shaking out. But that being said, I want to further dive into what are the teams that won the division last season and could potentially be due for some big-time regression. So we will be diving into that. But first, before we do so, going to be taking our next break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be looking at the standings from last season and pointing out different areas in which we could see some 2023 division winners actually miss the playoffs altogether. Now, to start this conversation, we'll sort of go on the other side of it. Teams that I think probably already have their division locked up. I'm looking at the Kansas City Chiefs. I think they are far and away the best team in that division. They have far and away the best quarterback. So I don't really see any of these teams rivaling the Chiefs for the AFC West title. And then I would probably be pretty confident in saying that the 49ers as well are going to be able to take home the NFC West. I know a lot of people are on the idea that they could be due for a little bit of a Super Bowl loss hangover, that historically that hasn't necessarily worked out great for teams to lose the Super Bowl and be able to put together another run, but the 49ers still have the majority of their roster from last season. They're going to get Talanoa Hufanga back this season. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time for them to get Dre Greenlaw back fully healthy after he ended up tearing what I think was his Achilles in the Super Bowl. But, this is going to be a team that looks very similar to what they were last season, and last season they were excellent. So, as much as the Rams, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, I don't hate any of those teams. I just don't think they're on the same level as the 49ers. But sort of diving into some of the division winners that I do think are a little bit more susceptible, one of the main culprits here, of course, has to be the Buffalo Bills, because it took an extraordinary second half push, and a little bit of meltdown is dramatic, but the Dolphins, failing to close out the division for the Bills to end up winning it in 2023. And ultimately, the Bills still have Josh Allen, and I think that gets you around the 10-win mark almost on its own. I think that he's that special, but a lot of losses in this offseason, of course, receivers and Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, a lot of losses in the secondary. Definitely hurts that Matt Milano, they're probably their best defensive player at this point and their star linebacker, he has a torn bicep that is going to keep him out until December-ish. So the Bills are going to maybe have to tread water a little bit early on in the season to be able to stave off what should be a very competitive AFC East. Last year, like I mentioned, it took a very impressive run at the end of the year for the Bills to be able to steal that one from the Dolphins. The Dolphins are going to be back. They should be healthier than they were at the end of last season, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Everybody was sort of hanging on for dear life at that point, it felt like. And the Jets have Aaron Rodgers back. So the Bills are definitely susceptible to not winning the division, and if that's the case, I mean, the AFC is pretty deep in terms of wild card teams, where you have a couple teams from the East, a couple teams from the North as well. The South, a lot of people are, building up momentum for, especially with the Colts, the Jaguars, with Trevor Lawrence being healthy. So the Bills are definitely at risk of missing the playoffs altogether, which is not something that would have predicted, anytime in this Josh Allen era, but it's on the table for them. I have confidence in the Bills to be able to, stave that off, but it's very much in play, which sort of takes me to, I just referenced the AFC North as well, and this is a division where the Baltimore Ravens were very debatably, the best team in the NFL. I know they end up losing to the Chiefs, but roster for roster, I think the Ravens were as good as anybody last season. And they have some significant changes within their building. The offensive line, they lose a couple starters there. They lose their defensive coordinator to the Seahawks and Mike McDonald. A couple top assistants leave as well as a part of that move. So a lot of turnover here for the Ravens in a division where there's not that much room to really mess around. Last year, all 4 teams finishing with winning records, and that is including the Cincinnati Bengals, who are going to have Joe Burrow back and hopefully fully healthy, which becomes an entirely different game from there. I think the Ravens are in a real risk of missing out on the division. They're still going to be good enough, I would have to imagine, as long as Lamar Jackson is healthy, that they make the playoffs. But division title is very much up for grabs there. Very quickly here on the South, I kind of think the Texans are set to potentially have a letdown season, which is not what I'm hoping happens, because I want to see CJ Stroud continue to emerge, but I don't know. I can't quit Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. I'm definitely a pro Trevor Lawrence guy. I stand by the contract that they gave out to him. Going to 100% need more consistency from him. And the rest of the Jaguars team, I mean, it probably at this point, the Texans have probably lapped them. So, Texans, I think that it's very conceivable that they could end up having a letdown year. It's probably not where I'm going here, but at this point, you just have to understand as well that there are going to be teams that end up taking the division title. And, we never just repeat chalk-wise every single year of these same division winners. That's not how the NFL works. I think there's a lot of room for mix-up in the NFC, though, because the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys had a very underwhelming offseason. I think that they have a bottom-tier offensive line at this point, which is something that not a lot of people are talking about. And they're definitely at risk of missing the playoffs altogether. Now, I suppose that I just did the preview the other week of the NFC East, and I did have them winning it. I'm second-guessing myself a little bit since then in terms of, well, if they're going to lose games in the trenches, that could be a huge downfall for them, because it's going to be a lot of Dak Prescott trying to, go superhuman mode, and I don't think that that's really a recipe for success for an NFL team. So the Cowboys are definitely at risk, I would say. The NFC North, with just how good the division is at this point, I think it's going to be hard for the Lions to take home another division title. The Packers and the Bears specifically, I think, are going to be on their tails a little bit. I like the Lions a lot. I definitely just have a rooting interest in terms of the story of it. But at the same time, the Packers are very capable as well of being able to, take that next step this year. They were already ahead of schedule last season, being one of the youngest, I think it was the youngest team in the NFL, one of the youngest teams in history to make the playoffs. And they ended up winning a game and probably should have beaten the 49ers in the divisional round. So there's a lot of room to grow for the Packers. The Lions, they're going to have people at their throat. Dan Campbell said it himself. There's no more sneaking up on anybody. So, teams are going to come ready to play when it comes to the Lions. So they're definitely at risk. I would mark them in as a playoff team. And like I just talked about with the Buccaneers, I think they're out this year. I think the Falcons end up winning this division with Kirk Cousins. I'm definitely not putting them in Super Bowl contention conversations like some other people are, but I think that they end up winning the division, and I have a really hard time imagining that this division gets multiple playoff teams just with how deep the NFC North is. I would think that both the Cowboys and the Eagles make the playoffs. Now, again, if I were to pick one of the teams to not make the playoffs, I'd maybe lean with the Cowboys as opposed to the Eagles. So, but, you probably have one wild card team from the NFC East, at least one in the NFC North, and that starts to really tighten things up in this NFC South, where during my predictions, I had both the Buccaneers and the Saints at 9 wins, playing with fire in that conversation in terms of being able to, make the playoffs with 9 wins. It's very much on the table, but I think the Buccaneers could go from a division winner and a team that won a playoff game to missing it altogether this year. And then, like I mentioned, NFC West, I think the 49ers are probably just fine ultimately. I think that, honestly, the Rams, I see them regressing a little bit. A lot of people have been getting on the Seahawks bandwagon, I feel like, is what I've seen. And I don't hate it. I like Mike McDonald a lot as a head coach. I think he's going to really shore up that defense. It's just at this point, I know Geno Smith, they wrote him off, but he didn't write back. But how much stock are we still holding into Geno Smith? I thought a lot of his flaws were evident last season, that he's not, this miracle turnaround story. He's a good quarterback at this point, but probably below league average. And I don't know. I definitely have my doubts with the Seahawks, but they could for sure be in, playoff conversations. But, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We are running low on time here, so we're going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into predictions for the college football playoffs under this new format. So we're going to be diving into all of that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into the college football playoffs and making some predictions for which 12 teams will be able to make it to the dance. Now, obviously, a lot of unknown under this new playoff structure, expanded from 4 to 12 teams. So, going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. As we know, it is the 4 highest ranked conference winners, and then it is 8 at-large bids. So, have to start with the conference winners because that's how you guarantee a spot in the dance. Looking at the Big 4, I would imagine it has to be the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and the Big 12. I have a hard time imagining that anybody outside of those conferences are going to end up being one of those 4 highest ranked teams, but we will have to see there. But starting here with the SEC, I have the Georgia Bulldogs winning the conference. I think that Kirby Smart has put together a potential dynastic run over the course of these past few seasons. Talked about it before. I think if you're going 4 best teams, period, Georgia would have made the playoffs last year. Obviously, though, there was so much controversy at the end of last year with how these standings ended up shaking out that they ended up getting excluded from the playoffs, and I'm not saying by any means that's the wrong decision, but I'm just saying they definitely had a chance to be, a three-peat champion, which is unheard of in college football, especially in this NIL era. So I have the Bulldogs bouncing back and winning the SEC. Also helps for whatever it's worth as well that Nick Saban is no longer in the division. I trust Kalen DeBoer to lead a good program moving forward with Alabama, but at the same time, it's probably going to take a little bit of time until it's, working at 100%, whereas I think that Kirby Smart already has the Bulldogs in great position. Big Ten, I have Ohio State. Pretty chalk here through the first two. I understand, not quite as exciting, but Ohio State is an incredibly talented team. And what I think that they have over Oregon, and Dan Lanning definitely would disagree with this. He trusts his guys on the front line. I think that Ohio State is just a little bit more physical than Oregon, and I know the irony of that as well because of some of the criticisms that have faced them, but I think they have a two-headed monster in terms of a running back room with Quinshon Judkins and how am I blanking on the name here? Travion Henderson. Thank you. But I think that Ohio State is in an excellent position to be great on both sides of the ball and end up winning the Big Ten. ACC, this is where I differ from the chalk a little bit. I think that Miami is in an excellent position to be the ACC winners, and I think that Miami winning the ACC, as long as this is a do or die year for the ACC. They need multiple playoff teams in if they are going to convince programs like Clemson and Florida State in the long-term future and stability of the conference. They need to show that they can have multiple playoff teams in this new 12-team conference where we're going to be seeing a lot of SEC and Big Ten in terms of these at-large bids. So I think that, again, very important year for the ACC, and I think that Miami is a very good team this upcoming year. I trust their offense. Now, obviously, there's questions with the coaching, and that could definitely hold them back, but I think they are very capable of going out and winning the ACC, and Florida State is a team that not to jump ahead here, but I have them getting an at-large bid as well. 2 playoff teams for the ACC, could be a third if we end up seeing Cade Klubnik sort of emerge into what he was thought of when he was coming into the role at Clemson. That 2-3 playoff teams is a huge win for the ACC. And then Big 12, I don't know how much love the Big 12 is going to get this year without a Texas and an Oklahoma. Utah is a nice addition, though, and I think the Utes end up pulling out the Big 12 and making the playoffs here. Cam Rising in his 7th year of college football is just ridiculous, obviously, and Utah is going to be able to bring the physicality and the defense to the Big 12 that isn't necessarily a common theme with what the reputation of the Big 12 has been in past years. Utah can win in the trenches, they can be physical, but Cam Rising is also capable of letting it air out as well. So those are my 4 conference winners that will be locked into the top 4 seeds. Now diving into the at-large bids. Like I mentioned, probably going to see a lot of SEC and Big Ten teams in this based off of the way that this is all shaped out over the course of the past year or so. But I don't know how many locks there are necessarily. You have a lot of good teams, but you are talking about limited space, and I think that some of these teams are going to beat up on each other and maybe knock each other out. I think that really the only lock I would have in terms of an at-large bid is the loser of Ohio State and Oregon. Either one of them they're both going to make the playoffs. I am very confident in that, and I think that Ohio State wins the Big Ten, meaning Oregon will probably be the highest seeded at-large bid. But again, don't know how many locks there are. Take Oregon out of the conversation. Texas and Alabama are definitely, in this race. you could consider them locks. I think that lock is a little bit extreme, but at the same time, I think that you have two really good coaches in Sark with Texas, with DeBoer in Alabama. They both have talented teams, both in the top 5, I believe it is, that I think, Texas, but they both have their questions as well. Texas playing in the SEC for the first time. Will they be able to sort of match the physicality of the SEC coming from the Big 12 in year one? Will there be any sort of a transition period there? We'll see. With Kalen DeBoer and Bama, obviously new coach, very talented team still, but a lot of turnover. Can they, and also, do you know definitively what you're getting out of Jalen Milroe, what his role is going to be? Is there going to be a passing attack outside of just, let him rip the ball downfield and see if anybody can come up with it? They don't have the prototypical Alabama wide receiver that seems to always come out and go first round. A little bit more limited in terms of depth at the receiver position as well. So, don't know if I would call them a lock per se, but I am confident that both of them will make the playoffs. And then Ole Miss is another team that I think I wouldn't consider them lock conversation necessarily, but everything that Lane Kiffin has done in terms of building up this roster and being able to, yes, losing Quinshon Judkins hurts them and their rush attack will not be quite as good, but Ole Miss able to win with both sides of the ball. We've seen them win shootouts like the one against LSU last year. I think they can win some more defensive matchups. I like Jackson Dart a lot as well. Nice combo on offense, so I think they should make it as well. That rounds us out to 4 at-large bids. Like I mentioned, Florida State, I have confidence in them. DJ Uiagalelei ends up getting, dinged a lot because of his initial impression at Clemson, but I thought DJ looked pretty good last year when he was playing at Oregon State, ends up transferring up to a bigger program in FSU. There's no way that he's not an upgrade over what Florida State had at the end of their season last year post Jordan Travis injury. I think there's a chance that DJ can be just as good as Jordan Travis. And I know that's not a popular opinion, but I think he's going to be definitely in the mix. Florida State's a very talented roster. Again, I have them as an at-large because Miami, I have them winning the ACC. I think that Florida State should be pretty safe even without a conference title to be able to make the playoffs. But again, in this big-time, season for the ACC, couple playoff teams is what they need. But I do have them capped at 2 there. I don't have Clemson making the playoffs this year. To round this out here, I have Notre Dame. Don't love it. They have an easy schedule, though, and I feel like as long as they take care of business against the teams that they should, they need to win at least one of Texas A&M, Florida State, and USC. A&M and USC both on the road, so some difficult games there. I'm definitely looking at that Florida State game because that could be the one that pushes them over. A lot of speculation on whether or not Notre Dame could make it with 2 losses. I think they would probably... They have a case for it. I think 2 losses gets really sketchy for them, and I don't think it's going to come to that. I think they win 2 out of 3 of those A&M, FSU, and USC games, but again, it gets hairy if they end up dropping multiple of those. And then last 2 teams I am putting in there are LSU and Penn. But he's a heck of a football coach. I think that they have a really good succession plan for Jaden Daniels in Nessmeyer, or I probably butchered the pronunciation there, but a lot of people really buzzing about him, reportedly had a pretty good camp. So I think LSU is going to be able to continue to produce offensively. Defensively is where you have a little bit more question marks, but it's not like they're without, playmakers. Harold Perkins, hopefully we see him have a return of what he was more so in 2022, where he is one of the best pass rushers in the country. So I have them, and then I have Penn State as well, notably leaving Michigan out of this. And I think it gets really interesting in terms of if Penn State and Michigan are sort of vying for that final playoff spot. Could Michigan get the nod based off of the fact that they won the championship last year? Case is probably not, but it is something to think about that Penn State feels like they are climbing uphill a little bit in terms of this battle now. I believe ranked ahead of Michigan for the season. I think it's Penn State 8 and Michigan 9, but I do think that in order to make it to the playoffs, have a committee sit down and choose Penn State, they are going to need to capitalize on opportunities throughout the regular season. But let me know what your thoughts are on the playoff spots. Let me know your predictions in the comment section. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. And we will be back same time as always, 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Monday. Have a great weekend and take care.